In the previous videos, we have seen how the major fighting of the First World War was divided into two significant fronts, the Western and the Eastern Front. Now that we have looked at the Western Front in detail, it is about time we start looking at the various events and the major battles that took place on the Eastern Front and also the significant changes which changed the course of the war as well. Now, discussion on the Eastern Front has to be started by us looking at the various nations and powers that are taking place in the fighting that is going on this front. So, on the Central Powers side, we have the major nations of Germany, Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Ottoman Turkey or the Ottoman Empire. Now, alongside these main powers, there are also smaller nations such as Bulgaria that are joining the Central Powers in making a sort of central blockade to fight against the Allied powers. Now, what are the Allied powers that's fighting on the Eastern Front? We have the Russian Empire, we have the British Empire that's fighting through its various colonies in the East, and we also have Japan that is present in the Far East. Alongside these major nations, the Allied powers also have the support of smaller nations such as Romania, Serbia, Greece, and other similar smaller nations. And now we can see that Italy is also being marked as an allied power. Why is that the case? Well, Italy is joining the war as a neutral power on the side of the Triple Alliance, namely Germany and Austria-Hungary. But as the war is progressing, Italy is leaving the Triple Alliance and then joining the Allied powers or the Entente powers and attacking Germany and Austria-Hungary. So as you can already see, the Eastern Front and a discussion on this particular front is going to be an interesting one as things change pretty quickly on this front. Now let us discuss the geographical expanse of the Eastern Front. Well, the Eastern Front is primarily including the Eastern and Central European region. And better way to see that is the area which is lying between the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea. So this entire area is making up the geographical expanse of the Eastern Front, and we can better see to what extent the Eastern Front was being spread by the green and the red lines. So as you can already see, as compared to the Western Front, the Eastern Front was much more expansive and significantly larger. Now, if you remember, Germany was unsuccessful in its attempt to capture France, as Britain intervened, and that led to a German dissatisfaction on the Western Front. However, Germany's luck shone in the Eastern Front. Alongside Austria-Hungary, Germany was successfully able to counter all the attacks of Russia. And not only just countering the attacks of Russia, the Central Powers also were able to capture parts of the Russian Empire through the Gaullist Talo offensive, which lasted between 2nd May 1915 to 22nd June 1915. Now, through this offensive, the German army was also able to capture many Russian soldiers as prisoners of war, as you can see in this picture. So, what is an offensive? Well, quite simply put, an offensive is an aggressive mode of attack or invasion where you use your army to attack and therefore invade a significant portion of enemy territory. Now, these offensives were an instrumental tool for the Central Powers to have a secured footing in the Eastern Front. Now, we also see that Germany launched another offensive towards the Kingdom of Romania and was able to capture Bucharest, which is the capital of Romania, on 6 December 1916. Not only the capital of Romania, Germany was able to capture 2/3 of the country through this particular offensive. Now, why Romania, you may ask? Well, Romania joined the war on the Allied side or on the side of the Entente powers, and therefore German occupation of Romania was a significant Central Power victory. The Central Powers were also successful against Serbia and other nearby smaller powers in the region which were fighting the war on the Allied side or on the side of the Entente powers. And through these invasions and attacks, the Central Powers were able to gather a lot of resources and supplies, and these made the position of the Central Powers pretty secure on this front. Now, this security was important as, if you remember, the Central Powers, namely Germany, lost a lot of footing on the Western Front. Now, these particular victories and this security was able to prolong the duration of the war, as if the Central Powers would have had similar losses on the Eastern Front, the war would have been over much quicker. So you can see that these victories were able to balance out the losses endured by the Central Powers on the Western Front. So now you know that these two fronts were not independent and they were part of the same war. And a power had to have significant footing on each front to have the upper hand in the war. But after these significant victories, a couple of events occurred that weakened the Central Powers' stronghold over the Eastern Front. Let's look at these various events. You see, in the year 1914, Japan joined the war on the Allied side or with the Entente powers, having interest over the Chinese colonies of Germany. And it started to pursue these colonies aggressively. Now, Germany's power was pretty much stretched out, having to fight on both the Eastern and the Western front, and it was not able to chase Japan away from its colonies. Now, in the next year, Italy broke out of the Triple Alliance, which it was following in a neutral capacity, and declared war on Germany and Austro-Hungarian Empire, its previous allies. Now, losing out an ally is already bad, but having a previous ally declare war on you is disastrous. In 1914, Britain decided to invade Mesopotamia, which was a part of the Ottoman Empire, to reduce German influence in Iran. But Germany, being a partner and ally of Turkey, joined hands and was able to defeat the British Empire in this particular campaign. Now, Britain, not being able to sit quiet for too long, took all its forces from all its colonies and invaded Baghdad, which is the capital of Iraq. Now, this particular invasion and capture of Baghdad is known as the Fall of Baghdad of 1918. This significantly broke the back of the Ottoman Empire and led to its eventual surrender. Now, the war almost seems like it is coming to an end, but the year that decisively brought the war to an end was 1917. This year already means a lot to us, as we saw on the Western Front how the entry of USA shifted the tide of the war. But on the Eastern Front, it's not an entry we are interested about. It's rather the exit of Russia from the war, which brought the war to an end. So, what happened? In 1917, a revolution broke out in Russia. Before the revolution, Russia was ruled by a monarch or a Tsar named Nicholas II. Now, the Tsar held all the power in Russia, and all the power was vested into him. So he controlled the church, he commanded the armed forces, and he owned all the lands in Russia. Now, the people of Russia did not like the Tsar, and he was rather unpopular. This is because the people felt their needs were not being addressed by the Tsar. Quite simply put, the people of Russia, especially the peasants and the working classes, who by the way made up for the majority of the Russian population, they were being treated like slaves by the upper classes, who made up for a minority. So they were getting frustrated by this exploitation and they wanted a change. Now, leaving Russian society on pause for a while and getting back to the war front, we remember that Russia was at war with Germany. Now, Russia put forward a huge army, which was made up of the Russian peasantry and the working classes who were forced to join the army. Now, even though Russia had a pretty big army, the soldiers in the army were not even properly trained and were ill equipped. So, we see that the Russian army was formed of the subjugated classes, namely the working classes and the peasantry, and these soldiers were sent to the war without proper training and even basic supplies such as food, shoes, and even basic weapons. So, in this situation, most of the Russian soldiers had to fend for themselves without any proper training or supplies, and therefore they were easily captured by the German army and taken as prisoners of war. And in this particular picture, you can see young Russian soldiers are being taken as prisoners of war. Now look at this picture. How young do these kids look? You would be surprised to know some of them are even younger than you. Can you imagine yourself in this situation being led to a prison camp? Does it not feel frustrating? Well, the people of Russia, the common people, also felt that when they saw that the upper classes were leading their lives in luxury while they are losing their children to the war. Now, this frustration is about to explode. So, as the war progressed, nearly 2 million Russian soldiers were killed and nearly 5 million were left wounded. In this picture, you see one of the many Russian First World War cemeteries which house the graves of a few soldiers of the nearly 2 million dead. Now, the public blamed the Tsar for even joining the war and sending the young Russians to their death. Finally, the people could not take it any longer and they revolted against the authority of the Tsar in the year 1917. So, the working classes and the peasantry mobilized and they led the October Revolution, which led to the Tsar having to give up his throne and a new government, the Bolshevik government, taking over in Russia, led by Vladimir Lenin. Now, Lenin, who was the new leader of Russia, had no interest in continuing the war, as he was more focused on reconstructing the country on the communist principles on which he had led the Russian Revolution. And therefore, he was looking for a way to exit the First World War. Now, can you answer this question? Which government came to power after the Russian Revolution? Was it the Bolshevik government? Was it the Menshevik government? Was it the conservative government? Or was it the fascist government? The correct answer is the Bolshevik government. Thus, finally, Russia exited the First World War in the year 1917 by signing a peace treaty with Germany, a treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Now, by this treaty, Russia had to pay 6 billion marks or 6 billion in German currency and also hand over a few prosperous cities on the western part of Russia to Germany as war indemnity or as war reparations. Now, since Bolshevik Russia was in such hurry to exit the war, it agreed to all these terms. Therefore, we see that Russia exited the war and a lot of tension was taken off the Eastern Front. Now, as we move on to the final frontier of the First World War, we see that the final fighting is being restricted to the Western Front. Now, before we move on, let us look at the front lines of both the Eastern Front and the Western Front before moving on to the final phase of the war. So, over here we see that the front has now moved significantly into Russia on the eastern side, whereas on the western side, the front is all the way towards Belgium. So, this traces the expanse of the First World War before its final chapter. Thus, in this video, we traced the occurrences and the course of the war on its eastern front and the various events and important battles which were significant in the course of the war. So when the war broke out in the year 1914, we see that Serbia is being occupied by Germany and Austria-Hungary, while on the far eastern side, Japan is joining the war on the side of the Allied or the Entente powers. Moving on to the next year, we see the Gorlice-Tarnow offensive, where Austria-Hungary and Germany are moving into Russian territory and invading a significant part of it. On the other side, we see that Italy is pulling a turncoat move. It is leaving the Triple Alliance or its alliance with Austria-Hungary and Germany, and then declaring war on its previous allies itself. Now in the year 1916, Germany is occupying Bucharest, which is the capital of Romania, and also occupying two-thirds of Romania. And Romania, since it was an allied power, this particular occupation was a significant central victory. So till now, the Central Powers have been progressing significantly. But in the year 1917, we see that the war is about to come to an end as the Bolshevik Revolution takes place in Russia. And when the Bolsheviks come to power, they wish to exit the war, which they finally do in the year 1917. This takes the load off the Eastern Front and puts all the final focus on the Western Front. And finally, in the year 1918, the final year of the war, we see the fall of Baghdad, where British forces are moving into Baghdad, the capital of Iraq, which is a part of the Ottoman Empire. And when they are able to capture Baghdad, it's a significant defeat for the Ottoman Empire. And it led to the eventual surrender of the Ottoman Empire. So all these events briefly sum up all that we discussed regarding the various events and all the happenings that took place on the Eastern Front. Collectively with the Western Front, it traces the main and important course of war. Now all that we are left with in the course of war is understanding the final phase, the phase which led to the end of the war, which we will see in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at deltastepcom or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it is rewarding too. So register for free now.